The day my husband laughed at my swollen belly and told his friends I was nothing but a burden he was too kind to leave, that was the exact same day my phone lit up with a message that would make me the youngest billionaire in this country. He was downstairs laughing, I was upstairs crying, and then I wasn't crying anymore. I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes, not because this story is easy to tell, but because somebody out there needs to hear it today. Somebody who has been mocked while they were building, somebody who has been dismissed while they were rising, somebody who smiled through humiliation because they knew deep in their bones that their moment was coming. This is my story, and I'm going to tell you every part of it, the embarrassing parts, the painful parts, the parts where I almost gave up, and the part, the one you're probably already waiting for, where everything changed and the man who called me a burden found out exactly what he had thrown away. Stay until the very end, because the moment he found out who I really was, I promise you, is something you will never forget. I grew up in a small town in the South where everybody knew your name, but nobody knew your worth. We didn't have much. My mother worked 2 jobs, one at a laundry service in the morning and one cleaning offices at night. My father left before I was old enough to understand what leaving meant. I just knew one day he was there, and then one day he wasn't, and my mother never once let us feel the weight of that. She carried it all herself, quietly, completely, and I watched her do it every single day. I was the quiet girl in school, not shy, quiet. There is a difference. Shy means you're afraid to speak. Quiet means you're watching, listening, learning everything about the room before you say a single word. I was always watching. I noticed patterns that other kids didn't notice. I noticed how money moved in our town, which stores closed, which ones opened, which families seemed fine on the outside but were one bad season away from losing everything. I was 12 years old thinking about things like that, and I had no idea that what I was doing had a name. It was called reading markets. I just thought I was being nosy. By the time I got to high school, I was the girl who tutored everyone else but somehow never got the credit. Teachers liked me well enough, but never put me forward for awards or opportunities. I learned early that certain doors open faster for certain faces, and my face, my black face, my round face, my too serious for a teenage girl face, was not the face they were looking for when they imagined success. So I stopped waiting for doors to open. I started learning how to build my own. I got a full scholarship to study finance and agricultural economics. When people told me my major, they looked at me like I had said something in a foreign language. Agricultural economics. Not glamorous, not exciting. Nobody at parties wanted to talk about commodity supply chains or land valuation in rural counties. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that the most overlooked industries are always the ones sitting on the most wealth. The flashy things attract the crowd, the quiet things build the foundation, and I had been quiet my whole life. I knew exactly how to move in spaces nobody was paying attention to. I graduated with honors, and then I spent 8 months applying for jobs and hearing nothing. Not rejection letters, nothing, silence. I later found out that my resume was being filtered out in early screening processes at several firms. A professor I trusted told me quietly, carefully, with sad eyes, that I might want to consider changing the way my name appeared on applications. I thanked him, walked out of his office, and never changed a single letter. If they couldn't see my value with my real name attached to it, then they didn't deserve what I was going to build. I had $800 in my savings account, and I made my first investment. I met Derek at a mutual friend's cookout on a Saturday afternoon in July. He was tall, well-dressed for a cookout, which should have been my first sign, honestly, and he laughed loudly and told stories that made everyone around him lean in. I was not looking for a relationship. I was in the middle of building something, and relationships felt like a distraction I couldn't afford. But Derek was persistent in a way that felt, at the time, like devotion. He pursued me for 4 months before I said yes to a real date, And in those early days, he was everything warm and present. He asked about my work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. He told me I was the most interesting woman he had ever met. He said he loved that I was ambitious. His words were beautiful. I just didn't know yet that some people compliment your ambition when they think it will always stay smaller than theirs. We got married 2 years later. Small ceremony. My mother was there. A few close friends. It was a good day. And for a while, it was a good marriage. But cracks don't announce themselves. They appear slowly, quietly, like water finding its way through stone. The first crack came when I started making real traction in my work. I had been buying undervalued agricultural land in rural areas, connecting small cooperative farmers to larger commodity buyers, and taking a structured percentage. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something you could explain at a dinner party in one sentence, but it was working. Money was coming in, real money. And Derek got quiet. Not sad quiet, cold quiet, the kind of quiet that has a sharp edge underneath it. He started making small comments. Don't you think you're overcomplicating things? And most people who try what you're trying fail, you know. And my personal favorite, I just don't want you to be embarrassed when it doesn't work out. He framed everything as concern, but concern doesn't have that particular tone. That particular tone is something else. That tone is fear dressed up in nice clothes. His family was worse. His mother called me a lot to handle at a family dinner once, right in front of me, and everyone at the table laughed, including Derek. I smiled. I picked up my fork. I kept eating, but I felt it. I felt every word of it land somewhere deep, and I filed it away in that quiet part of me that had been filing things away since I was 12 years old. And then I got pregnant. Twins. 2 girls growing inside me, and the moment the doctor confirmed it, I felt something so fierce and so certain move through my body that it almost knocked the air out of me. I was going to give these girls a world I never had. I was absolutely certain of that. Whatever it took. Derek's response when I told him was a pause that lasted just a half second too long before he smiled. I noticed the pause. I always noticed everything. 7 months pregnant, I was enormous and exhausted and more productive than I had ever been in my life. I was working from home, on my laptop, on phone calls, reviewing proposals, managing land acquisitions across 4 states. My body ached constantly. My ankles looked like they belonged to someone else, and I was on fire. Quietly, completely on fire. Derek had started coming home late, then later, then sometimes not at all with explanations that had too many details because lies always have too many details. But I didn't have time to fall apart. I had 2 daughters to protect and a company to build, and falling apart was not on my schedule. The night that broke something permanently inside me happened on a Thursday. Derek came home with 3 of his friends, all of them loud, already half into a good time before they even walked through the door. I came downstairs to get some water, moving slowly the way you move when you're carrying 2 human beings, and every step requires a negotiation with your own body. One of his friends made a joke about my size, the kind of joke that isn't really a joke, and Derek, my husband, the man who had promised in front of everyone we loved to cherish me, laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh, a real one. And then he said, loud enough for all of them to hear, "She used to be driven, now she's just large and in charge of absolutely nothing." They all laughed. I stood there in my own kitchen, in my own home, 7 months pregnant with his daughters, and I was the punchline. I smiled. I said goodnight. I walked back upstairs slowly, 1 step at a time. I closed the bedroom door, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I let myself feel every single thing that moment had placed inside me. The humiliation, the rage, the grief of loving someone who had slowly revealed themselves to be someone you never actually knew. And then my phone buzzed. It was an email from my attorney, a formal letter of intent. A strategic acquisitions firm wanted to buy a controlling interest in my company. The offer on the table was $40 million, with a valuation that placed my total company worth at just over $1.2 billion. I read it 3 times. Downstairs, I could still hear them laughing. I sat with that number, 1.2 billion, and I breathed, just breathed. And something in me went still and calm in a way it had never been before. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was just done. Quietly, completely, permanently done. I didn't go back downstairs. I called my attorney. Then I called my mother. Then I closed my eyes and talked to my daughters, the ones not yet born, the ones I was already building a world for, and I told them that everything was going to be fine, that their mother had handled it. Let me tell you what Derek never knew. Let me tell you what I had been building while he was making jokes and coming home late and calling me a burden. 6 years before that night, with $800 and one very clear idea, I had started quietly acquiring small parcels of land in rural counties that larger investors had completely ignored. Not because the land wasn't valuable, but because the investors couldn't see value that didn't come with a glass building and a logo. I could see it. I had always been able to see things that way. I built relationships with cooperative farmers, people who had been getting the least possible return for their crops because they had no direct access to bigger markets. I became the bridge. I structured deals that gave them better margins and gave my investors reliable returns on agricultural commodity futures. It was not glamorous, it did not have a cool name, but it worked with a consistency that made serious money people pay attention. 2 investors found me early, a retired woman who had spent 30 years in commodities trading and recognized immediately what I was doing, and a family agricultural fund that had been looking for exactly the kind of rural land strategy I had built. They believed in me before there was much to believe in, and I never forgot that. Over 6 years, quietly and completely under the radar, I had built a company that owned land interests across 11 states, managed supply chain relationships for over 200 cooperative farming, and had become one of the most quietly powerful forces in agricultural commodities in the country. Nobody knew my face. That was intentional. I had learned early that the less visible you are, the more freely you can move. The acquisition offer was the culmination of it all. The firm that approached me had been watching my company's performance for 2 years. They wanted in, and the number they brought told me everything I needed to know about how much they wanted it. My daughters were born on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after that Thursday night. Derek was not at the hospital. He said he was caught in something unavoidable. I held both of them at the same time, one in each arm, small and warm and absolutely perfect, and I wept in a way I had not wept since I was a little girl watching my mother leave for her second job in the dark. But these were not tears of sadness. These were tears of arrival. The feeling that every single hard thing had been worth it, that every quiet year, every overlooked resume, every cold comment at a dinner table had been building toward this exact moment. Me in a hospital bed with my 2 daughters signing the final documents on a billion-dollar deal. My attorney came to the hospital. She laid the papers on the rolling tray beside my bed. I shifted one daughter to my left arm, and with my right hand, I signed my name, my real name, every letter of it, the same name I had refused to change on my resume all those years ago. The news broke publicly 3 weeks later. I had requested a short delay while I finalized my personal arrangements, and those arrangements included retaining a family law attorney, identifying a new home for myself and my daughters, and filing for divorce with the kind of clean, quiet precision I applied to everything in my life. I was already gone before the world found out. The article ran on a Thursday, the same day of the week as that night in my kitchen, which I did not plan, but which felt like the universe had a sense of humor. The headline called me the youngest Black female billionaire in the country. My company's name was printed for the first time in a major publication. My work, 6 years of invisible, persistent, fearless work, was finally visible. Derek saw it at a gas station. He told me this later, in a voicemail I did not listen to for 3 days. He said he was standing at the magazine rack and he saw my company's name and something about the story caught his eye and he picked it up. And he saw the profile and he recognized the strategy I had described to him at dinner tables he wasn't paying attention to, and he realized. He called 6 times that evening. I did not answer. He came to the house. I had already moved. He stood in the driveway of a home with no one in it, and I imagined that emptiness must have said everything I had chosen not to say. His mother called me, the same woman who had called me a lot to handle at that dinner table. Her voice was now warm, apologetic, almost unrecognizable. I listened for 30 seconds, said I wished her well, and ended the call. His friends, the ones who had laughed that Thursday, found my professional profiles and left comments that I had my attorney's office address and remove. And Derek himself, in the one voicemail I eventually listened to, did not sound angry. He did not sound entitled. He sounded like a man standing in the wreckage of his own choices, finally understanding the full scale of what he had done. His voice cracked in the middle of the message, and I sat with that for a moment. Not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, but with a kind of deep and settled sorrow for the life we could have had if he had simply been who he pretended to be at the beginning. I did not call him back. There was nothing to say that the silence hadn't already said better. My daughters are everything. They are named after my mother and her mother, 2 women who carried impossible weight with extraordinary grace and never once let the world's opinion of them become their opinion of themselves. Every single day I look at those 2 little faces and I feel a responsibility so large it almost takes my breath away. Not to be rich for them, not to be famous for them, but to show them what it looks like when a woman knows her worth and refuses, absolutely refuses to let anyone else set the price. Here is what I want you to take from my story. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Every time I smiled through a comment that should have broken me, I was not being weak. I was protecting my focus. My energy was not going toward defending myself to people who had already decided what I was. My energy was going toward proving, not to them but to myself, what I actually was. The people who mock you while you are building are always the people who cannot see what you are building, and that blindness is not your problem, that is their limitation. Your job is not to make them see. Your job is to keep building until what you've built is impossible to ignore. I want to speak directly to anyone who is in the middle of a hard season right now. Anyone who is carrying something heavy, a dream, a pregnancy, a grief, a plan that nobody around them believes in. You do not need their belief. You never did. The most important belief in the room has always been yours. Guard it, protect it. Do not hand it over to people who haven't earned the right to hold it. I also want to say this about karma, because people love to talk about karma like it's some dramatic, cinematic event that arrives on schedule. Sometimes karma is not loud. Sometimes karma is just a Thursday morning at a gas station magazine rack. Sometimes karma is simply the moment a person realizes, all on their own, in complete silence, exactly what they chose to walk away from. That realization is its own punishment. I didn't have to do a single thing. I named my company after a word my mother used to say to me when I came home discouraged. She would look at me and say, "Remain." Just that one word, Remain. Stay in the room. Stay in the fight. Stay in your own belief when everything around you is trying to push you out of it. So that is what I named it. And that name is now on the cover of financial publications, in boardroom conversations, in the portfolios of investors who once wouldn't return my calls. That one word, remain. If this story reached something inside you today, if it touched something you've been carrying quietly, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with the woman in your life who is building something in silence. Share it with anyone who has ever been the punchline in a room full of people who didn't know who they were talking to. And if you have ever been told you were too much or not enough or both at the same time, drop it in the comments. Tell me your version of remain, because I read every single one. And I want you to know, whoever you are, wherever you are in your story right now, your moment is coming. And when it does, it will be worth every single quiet year that came before it.